moral values and duties do exist. Which ones are those?
I know duties exist. I've been dying the whole time.
As soon as you said it, I was like, Brian can't handle that.
If God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. To have a law, there must be a lawgiver. And that we all, I say, even intuitively know that things are right or wrong. And the only way that we can say that they're right or wrong is that there's an absolute lawgiver who gives the absolute law. Hello and welcome to the Sunday Huddle. As always, we are so grateful and honored to be sponsored by Sports World. Without them and sponsoring this, we would not be able to do what we do. And we're just so grateful to be able to come at you every week. As always, joined by Nathan and Brian. How are we doing today, guys?
Fantastic.
I'm doing wonderful.
That is awesome. Celebrating Dallas hat. This one, is that Dallas Cowboys?
Nope.
What is that?
Nope.
It actually stands for Dad Gang.
Yeah.
That's a real.
Is this a real thing?
That's a real thing.
Is
Yeah.
this a joke
Dad
that y'all
gang.
decided to play on the old guy before you did?
No, it says the.
If you know, I don't know.
If you know, you know.
I don't know.
And now you know. It's Dad.
So it's
Gang.
a dad gang?
It's Dad Gang. That's the brand. Yeah.
Is
Dad
it
Gang.
really?
Now
Yeah,
you know.
It's for dads.
So is you wearing that try to get some sort of sponsorship by Dad Gang?
He's already
We're
got
open
it.
to it, Dad Gang.
I'm always open.
Yeah. So just hats, sweaters,
At least free hats. Yeah. I'm down.
shirts, everything
Yeah.
else?
I think primarily hats, but they got other stuff for sure. Yeah.
Dad Gang.
I think that's absolutely amazing.
I don't know what's wrong with you.
I don't know how to respond to
You're
that.
a trip. So, man, a while back we did an episode. What do we do to prove the existence of God? How do we know that God exists? And we pointed to what was a cosmological argument that all contingent things must terminate in a necessary cause, I claimed. And we got some great comments on that and so excited about that I believe that there must be a necessary cause for all contingent things. And I think that there's other ways that we can prove, and we'll talk about it in the upcoming months, about why we can prove God's existence. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about what's called the moral argument for the existence of God. And the fact that there are moral absolutes, I maintain, helps to prove that there is a God that exists. You had much interaction with a moral argument for the existence of God?
I'm not really a moral person, so
That's actually true. That's one of the truest things he said.
What a good self-reflection.
it's opposite day, which
gosh.
means I'm lying. So am I?
Yeah, you're a liar too. So, so you're not a moral guy. So the moral argument for the existence of God, that is totally true. So let me give it to you, and I'll give you that's
And a syllogism.
I'm going to, in fact, give it to you a syllogism,
Do
two
it.
premises, one conclusion. So in a syllogism, we're going to give a deductive argument for the existence of God. This is so if the two premises in the deduction are true, then the conclusion necessary to follows. Here would be a proof for the existence of God. I often think about this, and this is why do we even talk about such things? Why do we talk about? We had great engagement. We're so excited about the Big Bang and a necessary argument for the existence of God, because there are ways that philosophically, I believe, we can point to the existence of God that are outside just personal experience. Nothing wrong with personal experiences. We all had a personal experience with Christ and a personal interaction with Christ. And in fact, that's the only way we get to know him.
Right.
But I believe we can actually take away some objections, some stated objections that God can't exist, and we can give proofs. And these proofs, like with the Kalam cosmological argument we gave, a contingency argument for the existence of God, and this one, to me, they kind of form a cumulative case that we can know that God exists. Here's what it says. It says, premise one, if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. Two, P2, objective moral values and duties do exist. Conclusion, therefore God exists. So what we do is we and I've done this on college campuses, and I've talked about the moral argument for God. So if you're saying conclusion doesn't exist, that it doesn't follow that God doesn't exist, then you have to say if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. You have to say that's false in some way. Or premise two, objective moral values and duties do not exist, or that they do not exist. That would be the refutation of premise two. And therefore, you could do it. So what are those two premises? God does not exist, and objective moral values and duties do not exist, or objective moral values and duties do exist? Which ones are those?
I know duties exist. I've been dying the whole time.
As soon as you said it, I was like, Brian can't handle that.
So yeah, I
Can't
have
say duty.
I want you to explain argument number 2 again.
I want to say
You can't say duty. You can't say, oh, I do.
how old is Brady? How old is Brady?
5.
I want to say it's like a 5-year-old,
Way more mature.
but that's an insult to 5-year-olds.
The 5-year-old is way more mature.
Yeah. That it would be an insult to them, and so I can't do it. Poor Brady. To me, to compare the two of them. Of these premises, which one would you say, man, I don't know if that's right. Or which one's objection to that? So if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. Objective moral values and duties do exist. Therefore, God exists.
I would say that the culture today would say that objective, absolute morals do not exist.
Yeah, I would agree with you. In fact, I would say that most atheists I engage with would say that P2, they just don't exist. That there's just kind of other ways to explain morality, but objective moral values do not exist, right?
Right.
Thoughts?
Yeah, I think they would say it's a like product of culture or a product of just evolution and is evolving and changing in that.
Yeah, so we have two camps, and you just pointed to one of them. One of them would be moral subjectivism, that right and wrong is ultimately determined by us, and the other one would be moral relativism, which is kind of close to that. But it's not just us that decides it, but it's a society that decides that. Right? So if society, so Jeff, you have this objective moral values that right is right and wrong is wrong. You think that points to existence of God, but I would say it's just kind of a cultural thing that we've kind of grown to see. So yeah, you've heard of those arguments, right?
Right. And a thing would be, most of it would come down to, can we believe that something? So, for example, if you were able to kill Hitler before he did the Holocaust, would that be an objective moral evil?
Yeah. So the moral subjectivist, let's pose that to the moral subjectivist and the moral relativist. The moral subjectivist would say, how do you feel about that? The moral relativist would say that, well, what would happen with society with that? What would we agree as a society about that? So I say the moral relativist would have a real problem because the majority of the culture around Hitler said what he was doing was right. They thought that what he was doing was right. He, in fact, was doing so because they were having some economic depression. He was trying to bring around some nationalistic fervor. Obviously, what he did was wrong in every level. But I would say to the moral relativist, wait a minute, what if the whole society said it was right?
Right. Well, they did. And that's where, again, it would go to, there is no absolute moral authority, but it is subjective, which is why the Germans thought Hitler was doing the right thing for their country.
So then we have the question. What a great observation. So then we have the question: who the person who is the atheist and who engages in moral relativism? Can you say in any absolute way that what Hitler did was wrong? And the answer would be no. And intuitively, we know that doesn't work. Right? That just doesn't. Intuitively, we know that no, it was indeed wrong. But I said, well, what if? So what they want to say is that with moral relativism is what they want to say is that so long as the majority of the people agree with it, that makes it quasi absolute. But it's not really absolute. It's not truly absolute. If we all decided that the best color was blue and 100% decided the best, that doesn't mean that in an absolute way the best color is blue. That just means we all agree with it, but not in any absolute way. But I would say that all of us intuitively know that taking the life of someone that's innocent is wrong. In every way, it's wrong. And in fact, so just because you defer it and say in a moral relativistic way or subjective way that you don't think it's wrong, I will tell you that most atheists that I know just would ultimately say, you know what, you're right. I dislike that took place, but I can't condemn it and say it was actually wrong.
Right.
That's what most would say.
Well, and then they might even go back and say, well, if killing is wrong and genocide is wrong, what about in the early Israelites going into the land of Canaan? And the genocide that they did with that, if killing is so wrong morally, how could God have ordained that?
So I would say, without going into an Old Testament, because we are going to talk about some of this, is God a moral monster? And is the name of the book, and I can't think of the author right now. Copen. Is it Copen? So the moral is God a moral monster? Tremendous book on that. But I don't want to go to that. I don't have any problem addressing any of those issues. Here's the thing: why do you think that's wrong? Why does that offend you?
Yeah,
why does that bother you? Why does that bother you that these actions took place? You're deferring to some ontic referent or standard by saying that that's wrong. What is the standard that you're subjecting yourself to? What is the measuring stick? By saying something, I've heard, and there's other atheists, I won't name the other ones that have talked about this a little bit, but they say, for a better society. Well, when you say better, what are you referring to?
Right.
What's your standard for better or worse? You're invoking some sort of standard. What standard is that? And how do you ground that standard? What is that standard grounded in, right? Yep. So that makes sense. So it's really kind of one of those things for me that it proves indeed that God exists, that there must be a law. To have a law, there must be a lawgiver. And that we all, I say, even intuitively know that things are right or wrong. And the only way that we can say that they're right or wrong is that there's an absolute lawgiver who gives the absolute law. And so even the references to the Old Testament appearances of, empty of people being slaughtered, battles being embraced and engaged in, that they're still evoking a standard, and they're saying that's wrong by some sort of standard. And so what is the standard that you're going by, right? So most atheists would say there is no standard, or that which encourages human flourishing. So if it encourages human flourishing, then it's good. And I would say, why is that good?
Right.
Why is human flourishing good? Right?
Gotcha.
Yeah. Questions on that? Thoughts on that?
So then what about the thought of, well, we, over time, not just like, okay, I get that culturally, whatever. Over time, though, we just, as a species, as humans, we have just become to know, we've learned, we've evolved. Like, yes, maybe that was not morally right. Maybe that was morally acceptable at a time, but now we've advanced beyond that, and now we all kind of start to universally recognize that morally something is wrong and not needed anymore. So then why does that mean there has to be a God?
Yeah, so it's a great question because okay, so maybe there's been this progression where we've grown through this. So let's say that's correct, and the goal is for human flourishing and to ameliorate suffering. Okay, those are the things that we wish to do. All right, we have to ask the questions: why are those two things that should be pursued? By which standard do you think they should be pursued? Right, and then what if? Is this going to be right or wrong? What if I said that we dispatch of all people who don't have a 130 IQ or higher? I could formulate and create a society where I think there would actually be less suffering and greater human flourishing if we allowed only people with a 130 IQ or higher to exist. And guess what? We could get rid of all this suffering and all this struggle, and we would have a more flourishing society. Would that be okay? Even today, they would say, no, that's wrong. By which standard are you saying it's wrong? Are you saying it's wrong like you're saying that Hitler was wrong now?
Right.
Only because of your vision there? Well, I'm telling you, I could give you a calculus. I could give you a math where I could say, no. I could actually say that there's going to be less struggles and less people starving and more people growing. And so why would that be wrong on any level? And so ultimately that doesn't do anything to do away with for there to be a law. It has to be grounded in a lawgiver. All of our beliefs have to be grounded in something that goes as outside of us. And I would say that has to be God. Thoughts or questions on that? Nope.
So yeah, when I think about it, so I do think that you still haven't necessarily, I mean, you kind of have answered, but not necessarily answered the question all the way to where like, all right, I'm an atheist and I'm like, all right, I have to either concede that what Hitler did was absolutely wrong, or you've got me kind of trapped. You've engaged in this on campuses all the time. What's a question that someone has? How have they pivoted whenever you've tried to? So
the only honest way to pivot, and I appreciate that objection. Yeah. I think the only honest way to pivot is to say that, you know what, you're right. I can't in any real way say that what Hitler did was wrong. It's wrong to me,
right?
But it's not wrong in a universal sense, and I let him sit there with that.
Yeah.
I mean, how does that hit your ears? Like, right. I've engaged in this discussion, and we brought up Hitler. Hitler's the primary example that everybody uses. So I've heard this a bunch of times, and I've kind of become immune to it a little bit, right?
Right.
But let that sit there for a while. You intuitively know that that's wrong. And this is not. I'm not giving you some final declaration that you have to be true, but you know that doesn't sit well with you.
Right.
That intuitively we know that's wrong. Well, why do you intuitively know that that's wrong? Why do you know it intuitively it's wrong to take the life of others? I submit because you have the law of God written upon your heart, and you therefore recognize that indeed it's gone. I love, and this is going to sound strange to some people, but I love listening. I love listening to debates. I love listening to atheists speak. One of my absolute favorites is a guy named Alex O'Connor, and I would love to. I've told you guys individually off camera. I'd love to have a conversation with Alex O'Connor. I think Alex O'Connor, he's a Oxford trained scholar. He is absolutely brilliant.
Right.
Brilliant young man. I've even loved watching the way he engaged. He engaged actually with one of our guests, our former guest, Gregory Pine.
Oh, yeah.
One of our Gregory Pine. He had a wonderful discussion here, and they talk about the hiddenness of God. I would love to have a discussion, put it out there, to have a conversation with Alex O'Connor and to talk about that. Alex O'Connor says that, and he talks a little bit about this in. He talks about consciousness, and then he talks about how would he explain morality. And he espouses a belief called emotivism. And emotivism is a theory that states moral statements such as murder is wrong. They're not expressions of objective truth, but rather expressions of emotions or attitudes. So he's basically saying it's not a like an ethical claim, and then it expresses a proposition. It expresses an emotional attitude. So when we say that murder is wrong, what we're saying is just kind of boo. That the word used is boo murder. Boo murder. It's an emotional expression.
Right.
It's just an emotional expression. It's not that it's tied to anything that's propositionally wrong. It's that it's an expressive emotion. And I would love to talk to him about emotivism. It's an interesting idea. He has an interesting idea. But he said basically it's nothing more than that.
Interesting.
And so it's just an emotional response to something. But I would say, why is that emotional response there? Why does that emotional response exist? I would say that it has to be propositional in some way. And how? And I'd love to hear him articulate that idea. So there's a lot of it. Most of them would just be moral. That would be. I don't know of any other that espouse that belief. I mean, obviously there are others, but most of them, more often than not, it's just there are no more absolutes, and basically we're going to live with that. That's not the way I would do it. I don't want to do that, but you can do that, whatever you want to do. And so that kind of provides a way out for anyway.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I know someone listening could be thinking like, okay, cool. You say that like morality comes from God. There is no good apart from God. Well, then it seems like from the outside looking in, if I'm reading the Bible, and Brian kind of already mentioned it, well, then it seems like God's definition of good has changed even, right? It seems like from the outside looking in that when what was good and was acceptable and okay in the Old Testament, like all the God's wrath and all this stuff was acceptable and good, but then now, like, if what Hitler did is wrong and stuff like that, then how do we kind of marry the two? How do we approach that?
Yeah. So what a great question, man. We need to get an Old Testament. That's what we need to do. Like we need to have a whole podcast on some of the
People
Old
are
Testament.
going to love that.
Old Testament objections.
Podcast. 20 minutes, the whole Old Testament. We got you.
No, but on some of these objections that we find that. So first of all, to call God's actions, and Gregory Pine does a beautiful demonstration of this articulation of this, that it's weird that we can't call, when we say something's fair, we're saying fair between equal parties.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Something's just, it's between equal parties. God is different than us.
Right.
His thoughts are different than us. But simultaneously, God is not like, being good is not like an add-on to who God is. It's his very nature or essence. I would advocate for something called divine simplicity, that God is not composite. He's not made of aggregate parts. And one of who he is, his very essence or nature is good. Therefore, everything he does is good and right and just. And so what we often do is we point to the person the innocent person that gets punished by God.
Right.
And there's no innocent people that get punished by God.
Right.
Whatever God does is just and holy and true. It emanates from his very nature. So therefore we can look at this through a different lens. It's interesting, that what we do is we attack that on both ends, that there's this wicked culture that, and I would say even some of the language there is hyperbolic, I would contend, and we can't get into the episode if we get to the episode, but go and destroy this whole category of people. So it's a wicked group of people that are warring against the people of God. And then when the judgment of God is finally executed, why did God do that? And then we're surprised by God executing his judgment. Where we sit by, and the question today, make it contemporary. Why doesn't God get rid of all the evil in the world today? If God's going to do that, well, because all three of us on the platform here would be done, right? We'd be done, right? So it's these things. But then when God finally does exercise his judgment. So even a text from an atheist friend of mine who says that, oh my gosh, that people are going to eternal conscious torment inseparably from God just doesn't make sense. So people can spend their whole life rejecting God. And then when God gives them what they've asked for, it's considered unjust. And I would say that we can't understand perfectly. All the language you use of God is analogical. It's not going to be perfectly univocal. It's going to instead be analogical, and it's going to give us to who he is. But his perfect nature is good. And any objections we have for the things that you point out, all they do is point to some sort of standard. And what is that standard? Give me the standard that you invoke. And what is it grounded in? How do you ground that standard? And I say you're always pointing to some ontic referent.
Right. Well, I don't think most of our listeners are going to make up words like you do on the spot. So when someone who's dumb like me and someone, I try to use the moral argument for God, and I go through your duties, and
he literally went through that whole introduction.
That's actually all I have.
That's all he wanted to say.
I've got no questions, actually. I just want to say duties. But I try to say that absolute. Read your duties again. It's the.
If God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. Objective moral values and duties do exist.
Perfect.
I do think they do.
So, and I would agree on that, obviously. But for someone who says, well, I don't believe objective moral values exist, or specifically, I don't believe that there is an absolute objective truth. Obviously, you don't go, so was Hitler good?
That's what most Christians do, and it's obnoxious. And it's been used so many times that it's a stereotype that they hate that we use. That's exactly right.
So how would you approach it in a way that, again, you don't have to use $10 words?
I don't. And so let me avoid using that, right? Avoid using big words. I would say that many people I would say this, and to make it really practical, live out your life in the way that you've just outlined it, in any way that's consistent. And you can't. You want there to be an ontic referent and a standard so that you can live in a peaceful, ordered life, but you don't want to be submitting to that standard. You want it to be there, but you don't want to submit to it. I want to say something ridiculous like there are no moral absolutes. Hitler didn't do anything wrong. I want to say something ridiculous like that. But I simultaneously want to maintain that I don't want you to steal my iPad.
Right.
Wait a minute, though. You just said there are no moral values. And in fact, I could make the case that I would benefit greater from the iPad than he did.
Right.
So what it is it's funny. You're living your life in an inconsistent manner, and there's no consistency. So you have this belief, but your beliefs, they don't hold water.
Right.
Because you live your life as if moral values and duties do exist.
Right.
And you live them people can't take possessions from you because it's wrong. But I'm telling you, it might be right for them if they want to do it and they need it. And you can't give me any standard. So I would say that the atheist is left with the problem of, and most would admit this, that you can't live your life in any way that is consistent. You can't hold to honor, to truth, to values. You can't hold in that because your worldview, it doesn't hold water. It doesn't hold you. Does that make sense, kind of? Did I make it in a more real way or no?
It's just, you still didn't dumb it down to my level. I laugh at duties. So when you say it, okay, I understand that why taking your iPad would be wrong.
Why would it be wrong?
I'm trying to.
I know what you're saying. Yeah, I know what you're saying. Go ahead.
It would be. So there's that. How do I say that in a way that, because again, it's Hitler to iPad. How do you open that conversation up? Because if I say, well, would it be wrong if I took your, again, I'm saying that, all right, I've heard the moral argument. Someone says, I don't believe absolute morality exists. And I say, well, what if I took your iPad? Would that be okay? Like, that sounds just as dumb if I said, what about Hitler?
So here it was. And the reason I used the iPad example is because I was trying to think of something that's as far from Hitler as it could be. So it's in this lower scale, right? So we agree on the grand scale, but the fact is that that's wrong. And we actually even agree on the smaller scale. But if you're saying it's just a product of society, if you're saying that's just culturally the way, it's a anthropology, this is the way we've kind of grown to communicate. And we found out that it's better to not take one another's life. It's better to live in a world where we don't take one another's life because that's better for society to flourish. I would say that's fine. That's why I gave the example of the higher IQ. We could conceive of a better way to construct a better society by that. And simultaneously, I could think of something that's small and impactful that wouldn't allow you to hold your worldview that it's just subjective, because you would refuse me taking the iPad, and you would refuse me because it hurts you. But it hurts you, it benefits me. So what do we do when we have this impasse? And I would say intuitively, you know that taking your iPad is wrong. And you know it because, and this is why it happens, I believe that we have value not because it's constructed by a society. I believe we have value because we're made in the image of God. And we have inherent value. Thus, I don't take the life of someone else because they're made in the image of God.
Right.
It's not just that society flourishes. So I would say to live your life in a way that you don't think God exists and you think morals are subjective, they're not objective, I would say you might believe that, but you don't live your life like it's true.
That helps. That helps a lot.
You live your life in an inconsistent manner. Now, here's the problem. We as theists do the same thing.
Heard that.
Let's be fully disclosed. We act like that we say that God exists, and then we don't live like He exists, right? And so that's the problem with us.
Right.
That's the thing we got to get right. But that's not because our worldview is wrong. It's just because we're wrong.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. Because you had said it with, again, so many big words, but it's like, well, I would basically say, hey, no, it's easy to say that. It is, because it sounds smarter. I took a semester of philosophy.
Yeah, exactly right.
So I know everything.
Yeah.
Or actually, I know nothing. Whoa, what is it?
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right.
But in doing so, just saying, like, that's a great thought. I would contend that you don't live to that consistently. And a typical way of doing that is exactly that helps it in just me understanding that. But I don't fault people for thinking that and for saying there is no.
Either.
Genesis 3 teaches us we want to choose what's right and wrong anyways. And so why would that be any different now if we can use big words to explain?
The sin in the garden, right?
Yep.
That you might know good from evil, right? The real sin I contend there is that you will be the arbiter of right and wrong.
Right. I still want to do that.
You'll be absolutely, and that's what we need to be not just self-deprecating, but this is who we are. Yeah. We recognize. But again, for us, it's not the standard that's wrong, it's us that's wrong.
Right.
For them, the standard is wrong.
Gotcha.
Because there is no standard.
Right.
So simultaneously, not only is there no standard, you live your life in such a way that the standard exists, but you don't want to defer to the standard that it actually exists.
Right.
You don't want harm done to you, and you want good done to others, and you don't ground it in anything.
Right.
You believe that there's no standard. I'm sorry. Yeah, I got off on that topic.
No, yeah, you're good. And I think worth clarifying for us simple folk, because we saw some of this in response to the Kalam and the Big Bang episode of, okay, cool, but how does that prove, what does that prove for Christianity? How does that prove the God of the Bible? And I think that we would say, well, this alone, the moral argument for God, that alone does not prove necessarily Christianity, just that there is indeed a moral, personal God. And then the next step is, now let's connect the dots on why that's the God of the Bible.
So we'll finish with that. And what a great thought. And I'm so glad you brought that up for clarification, because I think it's a really important point. So those two engagements, at least, or those two arguments we've given, I contend probably only give evidence of just a maximally great being. We certainly not got to the God of the Bible. We certainly haven't then. Or it at least infers a lawgiver. You know, I mean, it infers a lawgiver that indeed we have this law. So we're not trying to say that's compelling proof. You're exactly right. So we want to be very, very careful. And we believe, however, I believe that these are some philosophical objections. I think it was Calvin that said often that he engaged in arguments with debates or atheists. And he would do so in poor spirit, kind of a bad spirit and bad argument, to shut their obstreperous mouths. That's what he said. But I think that for me, what this does is that it forms a logical case that God could exist. Yeah. And in fact, God existing for me as a necessary cause for all contingent things is the best explanation. The fact that this is not dogmatic, and so certainly we're not saying this. We don't want to be very, very clear on this. The fact that there seems to be a right and wrong, that we all kind of agree is right or wrong, that seems to imply that there's this universal law that implies this lawgiver for me. And so for me, and we'll talk about some other things later in upcoming months, but it's kind of this cumulative case that for me, for there to be true law, there must be a lawgiver. Does that kind of make sense and clarify?
Yeah, it does.
And I appreciate that. We still love comments in the comment section.
Mm-hmm.
I'm certain that we'll get some on this episode, and we're indeed grateful for that. But man, what a fun discussion. Thank you guys for that.
Yeah, of course. And wherever you are listening, whether it be Apple or Spotify or YouTube, we would love if you would follow the show or subscribe if you're over on YouTube, and leave us a review. It really helps a lot as we push us out to more people.
Peace.